Thank you all for joining us today for our Automotive Dealership Interactive webinar. My name is Tara and I will be moderating today's webinar. Please be advised that we are welcoming questions during and after the webinar. If you have a question, please utilize the chat feature in Zoom. You can either send your question to the group chat or choose to send me your question privately. We will address specific questions to the content covered during the presentation and hold general questions until the end. Today's webinar is hosted by Rosenfield & Company and Proton Dealership IT. Our panelists today are Ken Rosenfield of Rosenfield & Company and Brad Holton of Proton Dealership IT. A reminder that today's session will also be recorded. We will be posting it on our website at www.rosenfieldandco.com at some point tomorrow. With that, I'd like to turn this over to our dear friend, Brad.
Hey, Tara, thank you very much. Appreciate that. So one of the topics we're going to kind of run through here that seems to be pretty interesting to a lot of dealers and controllers and various GMs that we've been working with over the past 6 months since this happened is a ransomware breach that received a lot of public attention. It's one of the very few dealership ransomware attacks that we're able to talk about because it became public news. It was a Rego Automotive group, which is down in West Palm Beach, Florida. They had an attack, all of their equipment, everything was wiped out, and a lot of the local news picked up on it, Automotive news picked up on it, and the Arrigos, instead of being quiet about it, decided that this was something they wanted to kind of share their story so that other dealers could learn from it and not go through the same thing. So they've allowed us to kind of make a case study about what we did for them and to use that as a webinar and as a kind of learning experience for other dealers. So having said that, I'll kind of just jump right into what happened with them. And then we can kind of walk through each piece of that. Essentially, the way this was discovered, Jim Arrigo, he owns, him and his family own, I think 5 fairly large automotive, mainly Chrysler stores down in Florida. Woke up, I think it was a Monday morning, and went to go check email first thing in the morning, and email didn't work. Matter of fact, they soon found out by about 8 a.m. nothing worked. Out of probably 600 devices they had, meaning PCs, servers, data center, everything had been fully encrypted. Nothing worked. When I say nothing, I mean nothing. They couldn't use CDK. You couldn't log into any computer they had. Every single thing when you turned it on just gave you error messages. So as a result, they literally were hard down. They couldn't do any parts work. They couldn't do service. They couldn't write a ticket. They couldn't sell a car. They couldn't do anything at all. So this was Monday morning. They reached out to us, I think by maybe 12 o'clock in the afternoon to kind of start to figure out what had happened. So we jumped in. Started trying to work through it. There was a message from a hacker that said, contact this email address for a ransom payment. We did not contact them, but we knew from previous experience, just based on the way it was done, the email address, the language that was used, we were pretty comfortable with kind of where we knew this was coming from. It was one of just a handful of groups in Eastern Europe that does this kind of attack. So we knew based on their past experience that we would expect that to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $800,000 to $2 million ransom in order for them to get their data back, in order for them to get the computers working again. That doesn't actually include getting it working again. That just includes getting the key to unlock the data and then start repairing it. So this was kind of the Automotive News articles written about it later. If you guys have memberships, Automotive News, you can find this online, or we can send you a copy of it later. Next slide. There was another article that was written by a group called Know Before, talked about the same thing. Just kind of walked through, the basic premise of it. But what I want to do is kind of do a deep dive of how it all started, and then how we got through it, and then kind of what we learned from it, and what the dealership and our other clients kind of do a little differently to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Go ahead, Tara. So basically the pieces of kind of the attack as to how it happened, it starts from typically an email. I'd say probably 95% of what we see is an email that comes in with a Word document, Excel document attached to it. And that document has what's called a macro. The macro runs, it installs some malicious software, That software then, as soon as it gets installed, it reaches out to what we call a command and control server. So it contacts the headquarters of the guys that sent it and lets them know that it made it through all the phishing, all the spam filter, and it actually got installed. It then starts to download some additional tools. It starts to kind of make its way through. And then the last two steps, it encrypts every single thing in the dealership, and then you get the extortion at the end. So those are kind of the 5 stages of a basic ransomware attack. And by the way, if anybody has any questions at all, feel free. I'm going to kind of roll through this stuff just to keep it kind of condensed in time. But if anybody has anything they want to ask, feel free to just jump in here and I'll stop at any given time and kind of walk back through something. So this is the email. We were able to actually trace this all the way back to the original user that started this. And we were able to see every single thing that happened from the beginning until when they got encrypted. So the email actually came in on 12/6 on a Friday, and the ransomware actually took place on a Monday morning. So there were several days there where these guys were in the network kind of poking around and looking around, and had the right tools and procedures and processes been in place, this could have been stopped right here. It would have never made it past, Friday at 5 o'clock, much less everything that went on over the weekend and all the way through the extortion. So this was an email that came in, and it looks like it came from their accountant. It actually didn't. If you looked a little closer, it was a Japanese email address. But what had happened is the controller's email had previously been compromised. And then this automated system called Emotet was sending out emails to everybody that was in the contact list of the controller. So this was actually a finance manager that got this email. Didn't realize it was from a Japanese email address, even though it was clearly written up top. He just saw it, clicked on it, and then followed the instructions in the email on the attachment. Go forward for me, Tara. All right, so when he opened the attachment, he got this little Word document here that says this document was created in online version of 365. And in order to view this, you have to click Enable Editing at the top and then Enable Content. And that basically, they're walking him through bypassing all the security features that prevent this from being ran. Click for me. Now, there should have been a little video clip in there that played. I guess it didn't start playing. I was going to kind of walk them through. Go back one more. Go back one more for me. That should be a video. Oh, well. Basically, that's all right. We can keep going. I'll walk you through what the video does. Basically, they get a little pop-up when they open the Word document. They then follow the instructions if they're not paying attention. And at the end, the Word document just disappears. So go ahead and go forward 2 for me. And we'll just go on to the next. Keep going, one more. All right. So after, right there. So after they clicked on the Word document and ran that, that was at 4:38. So this was a group called Shades Group, which was actually doing the attack here. So they started to download all their tools. We see that happen on that computer right at 4:38, a few minutes after the actual first click. Keep going for me. And just to give you an idea, so we're now about not even 8 minutes later. We've now downloaded all sorts of different modules, and this is all happening in the background of this first computer. Nobody knows it happened. It's just silently running in the background. The guy who originally clicked this didn't see anything in the Word document, closed it, and went on to something else and never thought twice about it. So 8 minutes later, we've downloaded a tool called TrickBot. TrickBot is a really nasty malware that we're seeing in probably 60% of the ransomware and the attacks like this. It has all these different tools that are part of it that I'll walk through real quick. So it grabs passwords. It'll look all around the network. It'll scan everything. It even can, it's got a website injector. So if you go to Bank of America, it can actually overwrite and capture everything you're writing. It can even change the dollar value you're looking at on your bank accounts. It can then record all that, come back, and next time you go to the website, it shows you the right amount, even though they've taken money out. So a lot of tools are in this platform. Go forward for me. And this is very, kind of high level stuff. I've kind of given this presentation to a lot of different cybersecurity groups. And I've also kind of given it to a lot of NADA and dealer groups. So I kind of have a little bit of everything in here. So you don't need to really, grasp any of this as far as understanding just kind of the complexity of how this thing works. Basically what TrickBot does is it comes in and, like I said, it can grab all the passwords on your computer. It can look at all the passwords on any computer in your network. It starts attacking laterally every single thing in your network outside of the actual computers themselves. So it'll look at servers. It'll look at even devices. switches, firewalls, credit card processing machines. It goes after every single thing on your network to try to move laterally. Jump forward for me. So real quick, one more time, these are kind of some of the tools, just so you kind of get an idea of how deep, just one little click on this Word document, what it's led to in the network now. This thing is looking at banking information. It's looking for application, anything you might have stored in an application of any sort. It grabs all your email. It gets your passwords out of email. It looks at everything else on the network. It dumps every browser of every search you've ever been to, anywhere you've ever stored a password in your browser. It then builds an entire network map of your network and sends this back to headquarters. Jump forward for me. So that's all going on. On Saturday by 10 o'clock at night, we're able to start seeing that they are now actually, they've kind of gone from the automated discovery. They've realized this is a big target. This is a Rigo Auto Group. It's got a lot of dollar value to it. So now they've brought in the next team and they're actually literally logging into PCs now through back doors. And all night, Saturday night, we're able to see them hopping around, checking out different servers, looking at, hopping into financial PCs, trying to look for data. They're looking for, just to kind of get an idea what's there, where all the crown jewels are, and what do they need to do to make sure that they exert maximum damage. Go ahead. All right, so on Sunday, now remember this started on Friday, so now we're at Sunday at midnight. I say all hell breaks loose. They use a tool called PowerShell Empire, and it basically pushes across the entire infrastructure. They use a toolkit called Ryuk, and out of 29 servers, 25 are successfully encrypted. Out of all the PCs, the majority of them are encrypted. They did not have a whole lot of backups in place. They only had 6 servers that were actually backed up, so we lost a ton of data. Incidentally, we're right in the middle right now of another one of these for a large group with about 1,300 PCs, 40 servers in 4 states with 18 stores, and almost the exact same scenario unfolded, except they had actually been in there for about 2 weeks, but encrypted everything. It's one of the many that we do that's not public, so we can't discuss too many details about it, but just to give you guys an idea, we deal with probably one every 6 weeks of a major group going through this. So since the beginning of the year, we've probably done 5 or 6 of these. Some of them are single points, but some of them, like the one we're working right now, say there are 1,300 PCs across, I think 18 locations, 18 rooftops. So this is common. You just don't hear about it as much because people don't go public with it. So next slide for me. So the morning after, this is kind of what all of the computers look like. They all had this message on them. If you could even get logged into the PC, a lot of them wouldn't even get logged in because it had encrypted all the login text files. So they couldn't even get the computer to get past the login screen. But the ones that did just got that message up there. And you can see on the right, just about every file of any importance had an RYK extension on it and was completely unreadable. It had been encrypted with 2 different levels of AES encryption. So there is no decrypting it without the proper decryption key. Go ahead for me one more. So this was just kind of a quick, how did we deal with this? We immediately overnighted 120 PCs while we were cleaning other PCs. We installed what's called an EDR platform. We installed a product called Sentinel-1. So EDR is called Endpoint Detection Response, and I'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes. But that is the absolute key to stopping these kind of attacks. EDR is kind of an antivirus on steroids. So the attack we're dealing with right now, they had Symantec, really old antivirus on there, and it was actually disabled. Was one of the first things that the toolkit did when it landed was just disable the antivirus. So older antivirus doesn't handle ransomware at all. It just gets disabled and it's pretty worthless. So one of the first things we did was install an EDR platform. We installed a lot of tools that help us kind of manage everything. So we can see all the PCs, we can see all the servers, we can see what shape they're in, and we can look for processes. And when we were doing the Arrigo incident, they actually still had guys logged in. There were probably a dozen back doors that we found where guys had left kind of loopholes to get back in, and we're hopping back in to devices even as we were trying to clean them up and get them back to business. The other piece we did was we installed a SIM platform. So what SIM is, Security Intrusion Event Monitoring. That allows us to see everything going on in a network and allows us to see everything going in and out of your dealership. So if you have a PC that is reaching out to China or Russia or North Korea or wherever, we can actually see that in real time, and we can kind of evaluate, all right, why do you have a PC on your network that's reaching out to, Russia, for instance? There really shouldn't be a reason for that happening. So we can see that connection in real time, and typically that indicates a PC that's already been compromised that's reaching out to get instructions on what to do next. So tools like that kind of help us put a shield around the dealership, and get better control of it. When we were trying to get these guys back to business, we had CDK lock down the firewall. CDK controlled the network there, and there really weren't any restrictions at all on incoming or outgoing traffic. So we worked with CDK to explain how that needed to happen and what they could do to make it more secure. Then we started restoring some backups that we had. We wiped out everything. We got a couple PCs at each location up so that they could, close a deal. They could do ROs. We got parts up a little bit, and we got their BDC somewhat working. So by the end of, this happened on Monday, and by the end of Wednesday, they could actually get back to a very limited form of business. They were completely down on Monday and down most of Tuesday. 5 very large Dodge stores. So it was a lot of business that they couldn't write. A lot of tickets they couldn't do. They just basically came to a standstill and sent all the employees home. Go forward for me. So one of the things that I talked about was using the security intrusion event management platform. What that allows us to do is collect data so we can really get an idea of any anomalies, things that are going on within the network that shouldn't be. The second piece is EDR. Tara, can you click on that and see if more pops up on EDR? There should be some other data underneath there. There we go. So EDR, what it does, I mentioned earlier, there's 3 big ones that you guys can look at if it's something you want to explore in your dealership. There's one called Sentinel-1. There's one called CrowdStrike. There's one called Carbon Black. Those are the 3 main platforms. And what they do is they use what's called heuristics, and they use kind of a big picture, big data approach where they connect all the devices that you have into one common shield. And the cool thing that it really does that traditional antivirus doesn't do is it looks for lateral movement between devices. So with the exception of maybe in your collision shop, if you've got CCC1 pathways, there's a thing that they do where PCs talk back to each other in a certain way that looks like ransomware, but it's not. Aside from that, your computers really shouldn't be executing commands on other or trying to perform procedures on other computers on your network. Each one should be doing its job. It should be going to CDK or Reynolds or DealerTrack, and it should be allowing you to run Excel documents or whatever you might be doing, but it shouldn't be reaching out to all the other PCs in a consistent manner. So when we see that kind of lateral attack, that's pretty good an indicator that that PC is compromised. So endpoint detection response, by putting that on all your devices, it looks for things like that. And it really helps us get a good, quick alert. Hey, this PC is doing something abnormally, or this server is doing something. And you can then lock that down and shut it down very quickly. One of the other things we recommend is a quarterly pen test where we're looking at all the attack points on dealerships. You look at the firewalls, you look at things like maybe you've got a camera server that's got its own external connection, but it's also connected to the network. You look at the CDK or Reynolds routers just to make sure they haven't misconfigured one of those. And the last thing we look at that kind of helps with this kind of stuff is security awareness training, where we actually get all the employees to kind of go through, understanding what a phishing attack looks like, understanding kind of what is going on out there and how to be a little more aware about it. Jump ahead for me, Tara. So security intrusion and event monitoring. This is kind of a dashboard we use right here that shows us, as I was saying, destination location, incoming traffic, outgoing traffic. It allows us to look at all the anomalies. We've got, big rooms with lots of screens up where people just sit around and look at this stuff and get alerted to anomalies. So this is kind of I would say if you were to put pieces in place, this would be one of the last pieces I would put in place because it's useful data. But the EDR is really, if you take anything away from this, it's, reach out to your IT guy, reach out to whoever does your security and make sure that you've got endpoint detection response installed in your environment. That's definitely the key piece, but this is a nice follow on just to kind of lock it down a little tighter. Jump forward for me, Tara. Just another quick way we use this. So this is one of our clients, Office 365. If any of you guys are on Office 365, we actually track in real time all the things that go on within 365. So we can see failed logins. Someone tries to take over an email account, we can actually see that here in real time. We can see if someone's, being a specific email address is trying to be hacked into constantly. We can see failed logins. We can even see where they're logging in from, and if someone logs in from, Indonesia to a controller's 365 account, then we're going to get an alert in real time. So just another level of security you can think about with your IT companies, your IT vendor, your IT guy, just to kind of ask these questions. What are we doing to make sure that we're secure in that front? Go ahead, Tara. So this actually shows us, as I was mentioning, this is one of our clients in Florida. We can actually see every user that logs into 365 where they log in from. If they create like inbox rules, one of the things we see is a hacker takes over an email account and then makes it so that every incoming mail from a certain individual goes to spam. That's kind of a way of them being a man in the middle and controlling your email without you realizing it. So if someone creates a new inbox rule, then we're going to get an alert in the bottom right, and we'll see, that account's doing something unusual. We can investigate it. So just having all of these tools to kind of give you visibility into your network and have your IT guys or your vendors kind of, doing this level of paying attention to things, it stops all of these attacks in real time. Go ahead. So this is a screenshot from the endpoint detection response platform I'm talking about. Just a quick scenario on what you're looking at here. It's identified an executable that's trying to do something malicious. It scores it, it alerts us, and our team is able to, instantly kill it, quarantine it. This is actually Sentinel-1 that we're looking at here, but like I said, the Sentinel-1, CrowdStrike, and Carbon Black are kind of your big three that give your team the ability to really kind of have this level of control of your network. Go ahead. And this was the lateral movement I was talking about. This is a lateral movement that was going on between a couple PCs at a dealership that we were involved with, and we were able to see in real time that one PC was trying to attack another PC, and it was actually remediated in real time. So next slide for me. And we can just start this. It's kind of the same thing, just another way of looking at the lateral movement and able to see what it was doing, how it was doing it, and to nail it down real quick. Jump ahead. So security awareness training, there's a company called KnowBe4 that's pretty much the industry leader in that area. They can set up a platform for you guys that kind of works with all of your, it's priced per month. It's like a couple dollars a month per employee. But it gives you a training platform. All your employees take the training, and then it sends out phishing alerts and things like that. Kind of gives them different little tests they do to make sure that they know what they're not falling for common scams. Jump forward for me, Winter. So along that line, I'll tell you a quick funny story. We had a group in Georgia, Hayward Allen Toyota and Hayward Allen GM asked us to do a phishing attack on them. Owner reached out, said he really wanted to test his people. So we built a custom CDK site. This looks like CDK support. It's actually our site. We own it. We haven't got a cease and desist letter from CDK, so I'm going to keep using it until we do. We created a fake email that went out from cdksupport.com that told all of the people at the dealership they had 7 days to accept the new terms and conditions for a CDK drive or it would stop working. So we sent that out in the morning, and by 9 a.m. we had a good part of the dealership filling out this form. Grabs the username. We destroyed the password, but we kept the username. We built a spreadsheet. We were going to send that back to the owner and say, here's everybody that fell for our phishing attack. And the email had some misspellings in it, and we kind of made some things that, this website has a big not secure at the top. Just different things that we want people to look for. So I called the controller 9:30, 10 a.m. and just asked him how the day was going. And he said, well, I'm on the way to the owner's office right now. He's really upset with CDK because we're having to go around to all our employees to get them to log into this thing. And, they've given us 7 days before they turn off the terms and conditions. And he's reading CDK, the riot act about this. And I said, well, tell him to hang up the phone because it's not CDK. That's us. This is what you asked us for. And yes, about 60% of your dealership fell for it right out the gate. So any little thing like this, I mean, we did another one. I sat in the owner's office and called the front receptionist and convinced her I was Reynolds tech support and I needed her email, username and password, and she gave it to me. So, there's a lot of things we can fix, but we can't fix the human component. The only way we can do that is to just try to explain this is how things work. These are the kind of attacks that are happening. and to give them some training so that at least maybe when something happens, they stop to think for a second, this might be a scam, and, not take action on it. Jump ahead for me. So this was just one of our security automation centers that we use to kind of keep track of everything for our clients. But that's really it. Other than that, I kind of just wanted, like I said, to get security on your mind, kind of get you to start asking your IT vendors and your IT guys questions. Take this back and say, hey, do we do this, 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 and this? And if they don't, then maybe you can point them in that right direction and kind of push them along a little bit. If you have any questions on anything, or if something pops in your head after this, feel free to reach back out to Tara and we can get you some information on anything that, might sound interesting. Is there any questions on anything I've talked about?
So much, Brad. That was awesome. At the moment, I haven't fielded any questions. I've got a note out to the group. If anyone on the call now has any questions for Brad, please type those in the chat feature. Until those come in, I think we're safe to move on. I know Ken is going to discuss with us from the accounting side some ways that we've gotten involved in using technology in fraud detection and prevention as well. So I'll turn it over to Ken for now, and then I'll get back to questions momentarily.
And I also want to say thanks, Brad. The cyber invasions, especially with ransomware, been around a while, but we're seeing more and more of our dealership clients. And I talked with Brad even a little bit last week. We're starting to see more of it. It's starting to be kind of infectious. So they have to really be on your toes and be careful, because they're asking for lots and lots of money. And they start off with hundreds of thousands of dollars or up there. So we're very fortunate to have someone like Brad work on some of these things and clean computer systems up and make it so it's a horrible event. You lose a lot of time, but it could be a lot worse. So Brad's technology is really pretty advanced, and it's something that we recommend all of our clients to look at ferociously, is the attacks that you get coming from outside. What we're going to talk about now is coming from the inside, from your own personnel and people like that you have that you've trusted in your own departments. And so this is a trust and verify type situation. This is going to be a case study. It's actually happened to a client of ours. And this also made automotive news, unfortunately, and it was a very unfortunate situation. So go forward, please. So this is it's a group in the greater New York area. It's 5 dealerships. All 5 of the stores are fairly large. And this had a little bit of everything included in this one, with some nepotism, where the 2 of the controllers were sisters, and one of the brothers of the sisters was also running one of the other divisions of the dealership group. So a lot of nepotism here, and they're also very close, which makes it even sadder. They were good friends. They were godparents of kids. They went to church together. I mean, just very, very close. At least I thought they were close, and that's maybe where you keep your enemies closer sometimes. So it was a long-term arrangement. This theft went on for decades. I mean, not even just years. It went on for an extraordinarily long period of time. And this is where the trust factor was very, very high, but they needed to implement some systematic approaches to verify everything, and that's where some of the problems occurred. They also knew that the owners never reviewed any of the vendor lists or even met a lot of the vendors, and that's something we always recommend too, is know the vendors, get to know them. There was one vendor that was supposedly for advertising that actually was more of an underground type individual, had nothing to do with advertising whatsoever, and they went under some aliases. And when we detected this specific vendor, through a series of dives into their system, their name kept coming up, and it was a very odd name that came out that we couldn't find anywhere that matched any type of marketing type personnel. It wasn't shortly afterwards that we discovered this vendor. The IRS actually came in to the office and started asking questions about this this individual as well for unreported income, surprisingly. But so this is a case of just some basic internal control items of verifying accounting records and knowing who your vendors are, and then looking for things that just didn't make sense. Dealership accounting systems are basically a menu-driven type system. Most people on this are very familiar with that. So it doesn't need a lot of manipulation. And so most transactions can be recorded in a menu type format. So there isn't a lot of thinking that really needs to go behind all this. So usually when you see thinking going behind a lot of accounting entries, usually there's something dastardly and devious going on with these. So if you see manual entries or something that's not a system generated type entry, those things need to be investigated. With today's technology, you can actually scan for all type of manual or non-system generated journal entries and just come up with what that was. We did that in this case and came up with thousands of them. A lot of manipulation going on. Then you want to look and see what they're approaching. And a lot of adjustments were made to balance sheet accounts, which really shouldn't have a lot of adjustments. So these are the kind of anomalies that you're looking for. And then when they were looking at some of the expenses and they had going through the expenses, no one ever did an analysis. There was no type of PO system. There was no type of approval system for expenses. Just a total breakdown of any kind of internal control you can imagine. And an expense analysis to see if they were using the right type of vendors with the costs going into the right items. I mean, some of the bad expenses were going into car deals like WIOs. They had a crazy amount of entries going into WIO accounts, things that just didn't make sense. So any type of basic analysis would have started to discover all this. And they, so we recommend highly that when you are paying expenses, that you make sure they're going to the right spot and they make sense of where they're going, and also that the expenses are legitimate. And that's just a basic internal control function of analyzing and writing the checks to just make sure that they make sense. One of the other culprits, what they would do is go to the father, who was an elderly man, and have him sign the checks from one company to another. And he never questioned any of this. He never questioned any of the controllers or what was going on. Why would one of the other dealerships need an extraordinarily large sum of money? So he never questioned that, and they knew that. And so they would just keep repeatedly going to the father to sign the checks and none of the other sons that were intimately involved in the daily operations. So when those kind of environments exist, and you're looking convenience of who's signing checks, just need to eliminate that and have the person that's responsible for the expenses or again paid on the bottom line, or they have ownership interests in the dealerships. These are people who should be cutting the checks and actually approving the checks. And another environmental issue with this group was also that they're in a very heavily ethnic area of the greater New York area. So these people didn't use a lot of credit cards or checks. They actually paid a lot in cash. So it's a heavy cash environment. They were paid, a lot of their repair orders were paid in cash. They put large down payments into vehicles in cash, and a lot of expenses that they incurred, the customers incur, were always paid in cash. So with that kind of free floating tender running around, it's very easy to start manipulating where things were going and hiding cash. Move forward, please, Tara. So some of the things we found, again, were fictitious vendors. So some vendors just didn't exist or they were related. And ways to find some of this out would be running scans on addresses, ID numbers, people's names, where they would end up in expenses, and just running some scans to see where these would go. In a lot of cases with this one, we found the same address would belong to 5 or 6 different vendors. And this should raise some concern as well. So just doing some various scans on who the vendors are. And some of the vendors were even customers. And in some cases, we'd match up where the vendors and who the customers were to look for similarities in addresses, phone numbers, names, and things like that. The way this was caught, actually, we can't take credit for is actually the bank. one of the controllers actually was paying off their home mortgage with a company check. So when you have decades of time go by where the perpetrators were able to just kind of enjoy the benefits of the company, and they made them perks for the company, and they started paying personal expenses. After a while, they get lazy. And that's what happened here is they just kind of got a little brazen, bold, and just started writing because they really believed that nobody was watching them. They just started writing large amount of checks to themselves or paying off personal lines. This also can be located through doing some data mining of looking to match up when they write a check to an account number. You always want to make sure that if it's paying off some kind of debt or loan number, that the loan number is on the check itself, and then match up to see if that loan number corresponds to any real loans of the company. And if it doesn't, like in this case, they paid off personal credit cards or personal home mortgages. They weren't company type loans, so you could match up, insist that the loan payments, the loan number goes on the check, then you can match up and see if it matches up to actual pure company debt. They also were buying a lot of Amazon cards and Best Buy cards and things like that for the company that they would run through promotional expense for their customers. But then you can do like a consumption test, were they giving these cards away and who are they giving them to, and keep some kind of track of that. And they never did. So they would write these large checks to buy Visa cards or Amazon cards and things like that, and then they never kept track of where they went after that point in time. So that's also kind of just using some common sense that if you're making an investment into affinity cards and those kind of things, that you keep track where they are, put them under lock and key, especially when they were the size that this company was buying at any time. Another thing that they were doing was looking to, they were buying vehicles for themselves, oftentimes writing off large down payments that never happen. So these are things that you scan your deals, especially if you're not making any money on them. Scan the deals that you're not making money on and find out why, and see if they were writing off deposits or bad checks or things going into the deal folder itself that didn't make sense. They never did that, and we found a lot of vehicles that were sold to friends, family members, themselves. Well, the dealership basically was paying for the car for free. I mean, in some of these cases, we went through the deals and back in and around and see where checks are coming through, or they were using journal entries to write off receivables, things like that. That the company is basically giving vehicles to their employees for free. Other things we see, this is the brothers of one of the sisters that were the two controllers. There were a lot of adjustments in deductibles that were going through the collision center, which he ran. So these are things that need to be looked at as well, and looking to see if they're not getting the full amount of what they expect the claim to originally be. And this could also be done through a scan of looking to see what the original estimate is, to see what the ultimate payment finally was, and then look for any discrepancies that are occurring there. So if they would think the estimates say maybe $5,000 and they're getting $3,000, and why is there such a large write-off between what the estimate was and what the ultimate how much they actually received. The big thing in this group that we found, as most of you know, dealerships, their accounting systems generate control numbers, and these control numbers basically are the main indicia of what a journal entry is or an accounting entry is. The system generates their own. And in this case, we found many control numbers that were generated by who was initiating the transaction. And some of them were just crazy numbers. Sometimes you see just straight 9s, straight Zs. These actually had names to them. So if you see something with an actual name to a control number, typically that's going to be non-system generated, and these need to be investigated. So this was just a matter of we would go through their whole system and locate all the non-system generated control numbers by their name, and then start seeing where these entries were going, and none of them made sense. So these were maybe affecting balance sheet accounts or going to expenses that would clearly increase expenses for no reason. So just doing a scan of all these control numbers generated an enormous amount of hidden theft items. And in this case here, actually, we stopped at one point. The actual theft in this dealership group was in excess of $10 million. So it was a big number. You know, it was something that really, this was actual theft numbers. Another item that we found, they never did bank reconciliations. I mean, they just got real lazy and they just didn't do those. And we've come up with some ways to do bank reconciliations, not just in the system or taking the actual bank statement, but today with electronic banking, you can actually, if you get into the bank, you can actually start matching up with deposits, when they occurred, when the deposit was made, whether during discrepancies, if a deposit slip in this case would say they were all checks or they had a certain amount of cash deposited, you can actually match that to the bank statements on a daily basis. So we would do that. And we found in some cases canceled checks that were canceled in the accounting system, but they never cleared the bank ever. And that was a large amount of money. And then sometimes they would clear the checks manually in the system as they needed them. And in some instances, they were almost 8 months to a year later after they wrote the check, they would clear it whenever they needed to make a bank reconciliation look good for their former external accountants. So daily bank recs can be done today very quickly. It's a matter of just programming your system and accessing your bank accounts. And you can match things up pretty rapidly with today's electronic banking systems. So these are things you're looking for, is make sure that the bank recs are completed. And just a basic internal control device would be that whoever's writing the checks is not the one that does the bank rec. So we want somebody totally outside of that function doing the bank reconciliations. They also weren't really keen at keeping good inventory records, which is kind of mystifying to me as well. But this is just the owners really having too much faith in their controllers. They had a large investment in inventory that wasn't theirs, and they were selling vehicles that were consigned, basically. So these vehicles had no tracking whatsoever in the records of the dealership, and they would sell vehicles that maybe belong to somebody else and then take a commission for that instead of selling their own vehicles. And this was also a very large number as well. So what caught this was actually doing a physical inventory, non-bank physical inventory, because banks could care less if it's not theirs. And so if it wasn't on the bank's floor plan, they would pay no attention to it, and nothing to them. All they want banks are interested in is the vehicles that they're financing on the ground or sold, and then have they been paid for them. So any other vehicles they pay no attention to. But these could be indicia of a big problem in your dealerships. We've seen on a number of occasions, not just on this one. So if you have vehicles that are on a lot, not on the books, these should be accounted for. And in this case, they weren't just like 2 or 3. These were hundreds of vehicles that were existed on their lots that were not owned by the dealership. So the amount of fraud that was perpetrated in selling vehicles that weren't the dealerships was another enormous number. It was also in the indictments. Next slide, please. Where did the numbers go? So mostly balance sheet accounts, so they didn't increase expenses or make the dealership look as bad as really was. So they'd hide a lot of number in balance sheet accounts or accounts that really maybe hang in inventory somewhere. So, and they would moving them around occasionally as well. So those other things you look for is journal entries, moving balance sheet accounts around. They had a lot of journal entries that just didn't make sense. They'd go from inventory to somewhere else, and then the balance sheet could have been fixed assets. It could have been to payables. They just bounce around. So they kept moving account balances all over the place. And so it was actually pretty tough to find. It was quite a maze of numbers. So ways to find this, again, is looking for manual journal entries just to specific accounts that shouldn't have any journal entries, cash being one of them, payables, receivables being other accounts. inventory accounts shouldn't really have a whole lot of journal entries to them as well. And so looking at journal entries, and one thing that is very helpful is to approve journal entries over certain amounts. So if a journal entry is made, let's say over $1,000, someone should approve those entries that are being made. And that'd be one way, at least people knowing that someone's looking at these. Not related to this case, we heard of another case, very large dealership group based in the Southeast that had, they really didn't look at repair orders that were under $500. Well, when we talked to some of their folks in their internal audit group, well, guess what happened? They started looking at repair orders that were $480. Well, they found all kinds of problems. So if you have a threshold of items you're not looking at every now and then, it's not a bad idea to start looking at items that might be just a little bit under that threshold. So if you have expense threshold that doesn't need review or something, and say it's $1,000, start looking at the $900 items occasionally, just to take a look at them. Today's technology, you can scan all of them and take a look and make sure to see if they make sense or not. The bank reconciliations, when they finally did do those for their accountants at year end, they just didn't even make sense. They'd have in transit numbers that were very, very old, or checks that didn't clear in time or took a long time to clear. So again, this matching up of your actual electronic bank information should alleviate a lot of those problems. The hardest one to find is going to be collusion, and that's going to be between people within the dealerships itself, or vendors, or customers. So these are extremely hard to find. Here in Florida, which has some of the largest auto auctions in the country, it's very typical, very prominent to see wholesalers collusion together with some of the buyers or some of the other people that represent different dealerships, especially with large volumes. So if it's a large dealer group and they're going to be unloading a lot of vehicles at an auction. So you want to see to make sure there's no bad transactions or someone's kind of jockeying the numbers around a little bit. So sometimes it's a real good idea to change people around, not have the same person go to auctions all the time or represent the dealership at auctions all the time. And also maybe just to chaperone someone, just put someone else that has some financial stake in the dealership to join in the auctions, even if they're virtual auctions, just to make sure that there's no impropriety. Just have somebody kind of say some final authority or something like that on some numbers, just to sit on the computer and making sure that your auction transactions are valid. Another thing is, in this case, a CPA firm that they were using prior to us coming in there taking a look at this didn't have any experience with fraud. They didn't really do much testing with fraud, and that was a big problem. Unfortunately, they ended up being sued. That was in automotive news for not performing types of procedures to look for fraud. And, so those are things that if you're going and conducting your business on a daily basis, include some kind of search for fraud, do some kind of verification. So at least the staff know that you're looking for things or testing things or verifying transactions. And just that thought can do away with a lot of harm. That's just knowing that someone's looking at the records and making sure that there's some propriety to what you're doing. Typically, almost every time we've seen consignment inventory, anytime in the history of this firm that we've seen consignment inventory, there's been a big problem. So I'm not saying that it's always going to be a problem, but the times we've been exposed to it, it's been pretty disastrous, unfortunately. Next slide. So today's technology, you can look pretty rapidly. We're able to scan hundreds of thousands of transactions in a very short period of time using today's just off-the-shelf type of technology. So things to look for is just journal entries. When you're looking at journal entries, how many go to asset accounts and balance sheet accounts? How many are manual, not system generated? How many are using non-system generated control numbers? And just things that just shouldn't, don't make sense. So if the system should generate it, it's something that probably is done by the system, and it's going to be valid. If it's an adjustment to an account that is system generated, then that's probably going to be a problem. Today's technology and using your electronic banking information and matching them up to your general ledgers is very easy to do. So bank reconciliations, there's no reason that they shouldn't be done on a daily basis. Look at payment frequency to vendors. Is it more than once a month? Is it according to an invoice? Is there an ROI to what you're paying for them? Is you getting what you're supposed to be getting? You see this a lot in advertising expense, to make sure that when you're spending money on advertising, that's something you want to have, and make sure it's going to the right place. Do you have too many vendors? Sometimes a lot of our clients have more than one CRM vendor or something like that. You're getting an ROI for each vendor. Why would you have contracts with other vendors and you're paying someone else for the same work as well? So if you have duplicate type providers. In this case too, the daily cash boards that are generated by the dealership, especially in the service department, make sure they match the deposit slips and what actually went into the bank. In this case, where they received a lot of cash, they were using those intercompany checks to make up for the cash that was stolen. So if they received, let's say, $5,000 in cash, they maybe deposit $1,000 in a $4,000 check, an intercompany check came through. And that's what was going on in this case. So if the cash boards say the cash is going in and the actual bank is saying, no, the cash didn't come in, it was through a source of other checks or something else, then that's a problem, especially if it's reoccurring all the time, which this dealership was every day, that the daily cash boards did not match the cash that was going into the bank. So those are something you want to look at on a daily basis as well. Have a good relationship with your bankers. Not many people go to tellers anymore. A lot of it's done through scanning. So you want to make sure that, again, making sure that what's being deposited into the banks or what's used to pay off loan balances, the actual enforce that the loan being paid off is a loan number that you actually have in your business. Look at the way the checks are being cleared to the bank, if they're sequential or not. Sometimes if they're way out of sequence, that could be a sign of a check that may have been held for a long period of time before it gets cashed or something like that. So look for non-sequential ordering, and also the control numbers, again, make sure that they're system generated. Reconciliation of customers, employees. In this case, this was a Reynolds user. If you talk to Reynolds, they would say, yeah, it's absolutely impossible for have one employee number with more than one employee. That's not true. We actually found 3 employees for one employee number. We also were able to find multiple vendors under the same name and address number. So there are ways to circumvent the system. We found it in this case. Reynolds denied that was a possibility, but it would have existed in this case here. So someone was actually able to manipulate the system. So if they're paying an employee with employee number 1, they're actually able to pay 2 or 3 different employees under the same employee number. So look for things like that. And that's, again, looking to see names, addresses that belong to your NAD numbers. It's a very good idea to conduct your own physical inventories as well. Just not rely on your banks to do their inventories. Again, the bank's only interested in what they own, what they have financing on. They could care less about anything else on your lot, and they won't even mention it to you. They're just only interested in what they have. So if you find that you have a lot of vehicles on your lot that are not financed by the bank and not owned by the dealership, that could be a problem as well. There's basic technology out there today. It's off the shelf, or just use your own scanning methods, or you can do your own programming into your own systems just to find some of these basic ideas. Next slide, please. These are just some basic types of internal control. The design measures that work, just use POs, and that's old school. But if somebody wants to have a payment to a vendor, just go through a simple approval process. The daily reconciliation of the cash boards and your deposits, bank accounts, it could be done really instantaneously. We were able to do bank reconciliations going months and months and months in just a matter of minutes. So it's very, very easy to look at this kind of thing. Do frequent spot checks of your schedules and transactions and what's used to clean up your schedules. Just forbid using non-system generated numbers. Just forbid it. The systems are designed that they don't need to have any non-system generated numbers. Know your vendors, know your employees, who's getting checks from the company. I mean, it's up to the owner that they should know all these people and have a good relationship with them. If they need to renegotiate contracts or something like that, that's really important. Always look for your return on investment for all your vendors and what you're spending and make sure it makes sense. You're getting what you're paying for. And this is another big thing is that if you terminate an employee, make sure you shut them off of the system. In this case, they had hundreds of people out there that still had access to a system that no longer worked for the dealership group. So I mean, there's just no excuse for something like that. And then this is kind of interesting at the very end of this deal. One of the people that was very, very involved in the theft died prior to them being indicted, and the group went to extreme measures to make sure it was the right person that died. They literally went to the morgue and did special tests to make sure that was the right person. So in that case, it's a little bit odd and a little bit different, but they just want to make sure it's the right person that died and they didn't abscond with the money and go somewhere else. So it's a little extreme, but interesting. So again, that was kind of it for this deal. They end up taking a lot of money. And I think what we tried to show today is that you have to really protect your main assets of your dealership because there's people outside of the country looking in, and there's people inside of your dealership looking in as well. So there's a lot of information and data and a lot of money that goes through a car dealership. And it's very important that you just do some simple things to make sure that it stays intact. That's all I had for today. I think we hit our 1 hour mark.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Brad, as well. No, I think you both have equally scared everyone on this call. And well, for everyone still with us, we will be sending out a recording of this as well that we'll post up on the Rosenfield website and on our social channels as well once I process that. Anyone have any questions, please submit them through the chat feature. I haven't seen anything come up during Ken's time. I know this is kind of a sensitive topic and sometimes people don't necessarily want to ask questions regarding this type of sensitive nature, but if anyone has any questions that you'd like answered from either Brad or Ken, feel free to email me. I put my email address here in the chat as well. If you want to reach the gentleman, you know, after the fact and maybe have a separate discussion, be happy to do that as well. But if there aren't any questions at the moment, I think we'll let everybody go. It is a little past 3 o'clock. So thank you both Ken and Brad for your time today. Very interesting topic, and for sure will keep us on our toes, and hopefully we'll get you guys in touch with some people soon, see how you can help them.
Thanks. Take care.